What happens when the very ground beneath your feet turns into an unstoppable weapon, and the air you breathe becomes a toxic cloud of ash? Imagine waking up to a sky that is no longer blue, but a suffocating, apocalyptic orange, knowing you have exactly 3 minutes to pack your entire life into a single car. If you want to stay informed about the hidden crises reshaping our world, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to wake up to reality. Right now, across some of the most beautiful and historically significant landscapes in Europe, a nightmare is unfolding in real time. More than 300,000 people have been forced to flee their homes. They are sleeping on gymnasium floors, in crowded community centers, or in the back seats of their vehicles. They did not leave because of a political conflict. They did not leave because of an earthquake or a flood. They left because a wall of fire moving faster than a human can sprint consumed everything they ever knew. Entire towns, centuries-old forests, and vital agricultural lands have been reduced to gray dust in a matter of hours. The most terrifying aspect of this disaster is not just the sheer size of the flames. It is the chilling admission from the people in charge. When reporters pressed government officials this week, asking if the blazes could be contained, the answer was a blunt and terrifying no. The authorities openly admitted that the fires are completely beyond their control. They are simply waiting for the weather to change. But the weather is not changing. A relentless, punishing heat wave has locked itself over southern and western Europe. The soil is baked hard. The vegetation is so dry that it acts like explosive powder, and the winds are erratic, shifting direction without warning, turning manageable brush fires into raging infernos that leap across highways and rivers. To truly understand the scale of this catastrophe, we have to look at Spain. What is happening in and around the capital city of Madrid is something that defies modern logic. Spain has declared a national emergency. This is not a localized warning for a remote mountain village. This is a full-scale mobilization of the central government because regional authorities have been completely overwhelmed. The capital city of one of Europe's largest economies is currently surrounded by a thick, choking blanket of smoke. Residents walking down the streets of Madrid are struggling to breathe. The air quality has plummeted to hazardous levels. The sky above the city has taken on a sickly, bruised color. The situation became so dire that the Spanish government had to call in the military. The Military Emergency Unit, an elite disaster response force, has taken total command of the firefighting operations. They bypassed the civilian fire services entirely. This is a massive deal. The military is only deployed when a situation has crossed the line from a natural disaster to a catastrophic threat to national stability. Over 2,700 military personnel are now on the front lines. They are supported by more than 400 ground vehicles and 21 aircraft. Crews from Greece, Italy, and Portugal have also flown in to assist, because Spain's own resources were stretched to the breaking point. The worst of the destruction is happening just west of Madrid, near a town called San Martin de Glacias. This area sits on the border between the Madrid region and the province of Avila. But this is not just one single fire. It is two massive, independent blazes that have grown so large they are now merging. Along a 15-kilometer stretch, these two walls of flame have touched, creating a single, unstoppable front of extreme heat. The emergency chief in Madrid stood in front of the cameras and delivered a message that sent shockwaves through the country. He stated that the fire is at its absolute peak and is currently beyond the capacity of any firefighter to contain. When the person in charge of protecting the capital admits defeat, you know the situation is historically bad. So far, nearly 10,000 hectares of land have been incinerated in the Madrid region alone. In the neighboring province of Avila, another 15,000 hectares are gone. But there is another fire, completely separate from the Madrid crisis, that is causing equal devastation. Near the province of Guadalajara, a blaze has already swallowed 32,000 hectares of land. To put that into perspective, 32,000 hectares is roughly the size of a major metropolitan city. But instead of concrete and steel, it was ancient pine forest. Dozens of small villages in this area have been completely evacuated. The residents had only minutes to grab their most precious belongings before the flames reached their doorsteps. Across the entire country of Spain, more than 30 separate forest fires are burning at this exact moment. The Interior Ministry reports that over 10,000 residents have been officially ordered to leave their homes, with tens of thousands more living under the constant threat of evacuation. Tragically, at least one person has already lost their life. The Prime Minister visited the Emergency Command Center, warning the public that the most difficult hours are still ahead. The temperatures might have dropped by a fraction of a degree, but the winds remain wild and entirely unpredictable. We are building a community of critical thinkers who want to understand the real issues shaping our future. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on how international governments should cooperate during these massive climate emergencies, and make sure you're subscribed so you never miss our deep dives. Now, we must turn our attention to France, where the situation is somehow even more alarming. The numbers coming out of the southwestern part of the country are difficult to comprehend. In the Gironde department, located near the Atlantic coast, raging wildfires have forced the evacuation of roughly 200,000 people. When you add the tens of thousands of people displaced by other fires in neighboring communities, the total number of refugees is staggering. French officials are calling this one of the largest peacetime evacuations in the history of the nation. They specifically use the term peacetime because the last time the French government had to move this many citizens this quickly was during a major war. Let that sink in for a moment. One of the wealthiest, most stable, and most visited countries on the planet is executing a wartime level evacuation because of fire. The fires tearing through the Gironde department are ripping through the heart of the Lens forest. This is the largest continuous forest in Western Europe. But it is not a natural ancient woodland. It is a massive artificial forest planted in the 19th century. The original purpose was to stabilize the sandy coastal dunes and prevent the ocean from swallowing the inland territory. The trees planted there are predominantly maritime pines. While beautiful, maritime pines are a nightmare when it comes to fire. They are packed with highly flammable resins and oils. They constantly drop dry needles that build up on the forest floor, creating a thick carpet of perfect fuel. The trees grow in incredibly dense formations, allowing fire to travel rapidly from the top of one tree to the next, creating what firefighters call a crown fire. When a crown fire starts in a maritime pine forest, it moves with the speed and intensity of a freight train. The Landis forest is currently acting like a giant dry tinderbox, and it is burning with a ferocity that water bombers simply cannot match. The evacuation of the resort town of Le Cap-Ferret highlights the sheer chaos of this crisis. Le Cap-Ferret is not a typical residential town. It is a famous, high-end holiday destination that swells with tourists during the summer months. When the emergency alerts were triggered, tens of thousands of vacationers were suddenly told to run for their lives. These were people who did not know the local roads. They did not have their personal vehicles packed with emergency supplies. They were in an unfamiliar place, trying to navigate narrow coastal roads that were never designed to handle a mass exodus. Emergency alerts were blasted directly to mobile phones across at least 5 different communities, ordering everyone to move immediately toward the city of Bordeaux. The emergency shelters in Bordeaux are now completely packed to the brim. Families are sleeping on cots, waiting for news about homes they might never see again. A separate fire near the towns of Biscarrosse and Parentis-en-Born has burned through more than 2,500 hectares on its own. The single blaze triggered an additional 23,000 evacuations. Entire towns have been emptied out, turning into ghost towns overnight. In one heartbreaking instance, a group of residents was allowed to briefly return to their village to check on their properties. When they arrived, they found nothing but charred ruins. The fire had moved through their neighborhood, destroyed their homes, and moved on, all in the few hours it took them to drive to a shelter and back. France quickly realized it could not handle this alone and appealed for international assistance. The response demonstrated the severity of the crisis. Emergency teams arrived from Romania, Croatia, Germany, Portugal, Sweden, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic. 8 different nations sent personnel to fight fires on French soil. The government deployed every piece of equipment it had. Canadian water bombers, Dash aircraft, and military cargo planes have been flying non-stop missions, dropping thousands of gallons of fire retardant. Water-carrying helicopters have been working around the clock. Yet, despite this massive combined effort, at least one person has died, and authorities warn that the drought conditions and unpredictable winds mean the fires could surge again at any second. But there is a hidden layer to this French tragedy that most mainstream news reports are completely ignoring. The fires in the Gironde department are burning dangerously close to Bordeaux wine country. This is not just any agricultural region. It is arguably the most famous and economically vital wine-producing area on Earth. The vineyards here produce bottles that sell for hundreds, sometimes thousands of euros. The landscape, with its specific soil composition, drainage patterns, and microclimates, is entirely irreplaceable. You cannot simply pack up a Bordeaux vineyard and move it to a safer location. The vines, some of which have been growing for generations, are deeply rooted in this exact plot of land. While the physical flames have not yet destroyed the major vineyards, a silent killer is creeping through the air. Wine experts are raising the alarm about a devastating phenomenon known as smoke taint. When wildfires burn, they release volatile phenols into the atmosphere. These compounds are absorbed by the skin of the grapes hanging on the vines. Once the smoke taint penetrates the grape, it cannot be washed off or filtered out. When those grapes are eventually crushed and fermented, the resulting wine is permanently ruined. It takes on the distinct, harsh flavor of an ashtray. The economic impact of this is catastrophic. The Bordeaux wine industry is a globally traded commodity that supports thousands of jobs and generates billions of euros. If the vintage is ruined by smoke taint, the financial losses will be staggering. The recovery will not be measured in months, but in decades. Generations of agricultural heritage are currently sitting in a cloud of toxic smoke, waiting to see if their life's work has been destroyed. The uncertainty is agonizing for the winemakers who can do nothing but watch the sky and pray for rain. If this detailed breakdown is helping you understand the true, terrifying scale of this disaster, please take 1 second to click the like button. It tells the algorithm to spread this vital information to a wider audience, ensuring more people are aware of what is happening. Now we must look at Italy, where the crisis is taking on a completely different, yet equally terrifying shape. Italy's situation forces us to look at the compounding effects of long-term environmental stress. The island of Sicily has been under absolute siege. Since the middle of this month alone, firefighters have recorded more than 1,000 separate interventions. That means over 1,000 times, emergency crews had to rush to put out a fire on a single island in just 2 weeks. The sheer volume of emergencies has pushed the local infrastructure to the breaking point. Tragically, a firefighter lost his life while battling a massive blaze near the town of Caltanissetta. He was on the front lines, trying to protect communities that are now being forced to evacuate. Large, active fires are currently burning near the town of Bavona, where more than 6,500 hectares of land have been incinerated. Another massive fire near Resutano has claimed over 3,000 hectares, but the destruction is not limited to Sicily. The neighboring island of Sardinia is fighting its own desperate battles. A severe fire near the coastal town of Agrigento forced authorities to clear up popular beaches and shut down major coastal roads. Tourists and locals alike were forced to flee toward the water, seeking refuge from the advancing flames. The Mediterranean islands, usually known for their pristine beauty and relaxed summer atmosphere, have been transformed into active war zones against nature. However, the crisis in Italy is not just about fire. In the northern part of the country, a different kind of disaster is unfolding, and it is directly connected to the same root cause. The Po River, the longest and most important river in Italy, has dropped to record low levels. This river is the lifeblood of the Po Valley, providing essential water for millions of people and thousands of highly productive farms. Because of the persistent or unrelenting heat and the complete lack of rainfall, the river is drying up. The water crisis has become so severe that municipalities in the Piedmont region have introduced strict rationing measures. They are now handing out steep financial fines to anyone caught using drinking water to wash their cars or water their gardens. Think about the reality of that statement. In the year 2026, one of the wealthiest and most industrialized regions in Europe is rationing basic drinking water. The drought that is drying out the Po River in the north is the exact same drought that is turning the forests in the south into explosive fuel. It is a single unified climate crisis manifesting in two different ways. What ties all three of these countries together is the invisible engine driving the destruction. This is not a coincidence. Spain, France, and Italy are all being battered by the exact same relentless heat wave. A massive dome of high pressure has settled over southern and western Europe, and it simply refuses to move. This weather pattern is trapping hot air near the surface, baking the landscape day after day. The temperatures are shattering historical records. But it is the effect of this heat on the environment that is truly dangerous. The vegetation across the region has been starved of moisture for months. The drought cycles that used to last for a few weeks and then break with heavy rain are now stretching on for half the year. When the soil and the plants dry out to this extreme degree, the fire risk does not just increase slightly, it escalates exponentially. Dry vegetation is fundamentally different from wet vegetation. A green, hydrated forest can absorb a lot of heat before it catches fire. But the forests in Spain and France right now are completely desiccated. They are like kiln-dried wood. When a fire starts in this environment, it does not need to slowly build up intensity. It instantly erupts. A single spark from a power line, a discarded cigarette, or even the friction of a rock can ignite a blaze that spreads at terrifying speeds. The fires moving through the Spanish mountains and the French pine forests are burning through landscapes that have been quietly preparing for this exact moment for months. The fuel is perfectly primed. But the dry fuel is only half the equation. The wind is the other, and it is the factor that makes these fires virtually impossible to stop. Firefighters have standard tactics for controlling blazes. They dig trenches to create fire breaks, removing the fuel so the fire has nothing to burn. They use aircraft to drop water and chemical retardants ahead of the flames. Under normal conditions, these methods work, but the winds, sweeping across Europe right now, are highly erratic. They shift direction rapidly and without warning. A firebreak that was carefully dug to protect a village on the east side can suddenly become useless when the wind shifts and pushes the fire to the west. The flames jump over the barriers. New fronts open up in multiple directions. The firefighting resources have to be constantly repositioned, and in the time it takes to move the crews, thousands of more acres are lost. We also need to talk about the human cost that goes beyond the physical destruction. The 300,000 people who have been displaced did nothing wrong. They did not build their homes in obviously dangerous areas. They lived in communities that have existed safely for centuries. The landscapes around their towns are now being fundamentally altered by conditions that no individual can control. Imagine the psychological trauma of standing in a crowded shelter, watching the news, and knowing that the home your grandfather built is currently turning to ash. Towns that have never experienced a major fire in recorded history are now burning. Forests that take 60 years to grow back are being wiped out in an afternoon. And the most frightening part is that the fire season is nowhere near over. European authorities have issued stark warnings that extreme wildfire danger will likely persist through the end of August. This crisis is exposing the limits of our current emergency response systems. The mutual aid agreements between European nations are being stretched to their absolute breaking point. When France needs help, 8 countries send crews. But what happens when those 8 countries also experience severe fires at the same time? Greece, Italy, and Portugal are sending firefighters to Spain, but they're also dealing with massive blazes in their own territories. The system relies on the assumption that disasters will be localized. It assumes that if one country is hit, the neighbors can step in. But this heat wave is not localized. It is continental. When every country is fighting for its own survival, the pool of available resources shrinks dramatically. The World Health Organization recently reported a 57% increase in the total burned area across Europe over the last 4 years. That statistic is a glaring red flag. If the scale of these fires is growing by more than half every few years, the current fleet of water bombers and ground crews will soon be entirely inadequate. When these fires are finally extinguished, the crisis will not end. In fact, a new, quieter disaster will begin. The ecological aftermath of a megafire is devastating. In regions like Guadalajara in Spain, the pine forest that burned will not simply bounce back next spring. These ecosystems require decades to recover. The intense heat of the fire sterilizes the soil, killing the microorganisms and fungi that are essential for new plant growth. The root systems of the trees, which normally hold the earth together, are completely destroyed. When the autumn rains finally arrive, there will be nothing to anchor the soil. This leads to massive erosion and mudslides. The ash and debris will wash down the mountainsides, polluting rivers and reservoirs. The water supply for millions of people could be contaminated by the runoff from the burn scars. In Italy, particularly in Sicily, the situation is even more dire because of the compounding effect of repeated fires. The island has suffered severe fire seasons in each of the last few summers. The scrubland and forests that burned in previous years had not yet recovered before the new fires hit. When a landscape burns repeatedly without time to heal, the ecosystem undergoes a permanent shift. The native trees and plants die off completely, replaced by invasive, highly flammable weeds. The soil degrades into barren rock. Sicily's agricultural economy, which relies heavily on almond orchards, citrus groves, and olive trees, is facing long-term ruin. An olive tree can survive a mild fire, but the intense, prolonged heat of these new megafires will kill even the oldest, most resilient trees. Farmers who have tended their land for generations are watching their livelihoods turn to dust. The economic ripple effects of this disaster will be felt far beyond the borders of Europe. The destruction in the Po Valley is a prime example. This region is the agricultural powerhouse of Italy, producing a significant portion of the country's rice, wheat, and dairy products. With the river drying up and water being rationed, crop yields will plummet. This will lead to higher food prices, not just in Italy, but across the global market. The loss of the Bordeaux wine vintage will disrupt the luxury goods market, affecting importers, distributors, and restaurants worldwide. The cost of rebuilding the destroyed infrastructure, the homes and the power grids, will run into the billions of euros. Governments that are already dealing with inflation and economic instability will be forced to divert massive amounts of capital toward disaster recovery. We are witnessing a fundamental shift in the European climate. The Mediterranean basin is warming 20% faster than the global average. The traditional weather patterns that once brought reliable winter rain and mild summers are breaking down. The dry season is starting earlier and lasting longer. Areas that were never considered to be at high risk for wildfires, such as the damp forests of northern France or the high altitudes of the Alps, are now experiencing dangerous fire weather. The fires near Bordeaux and Madrid are proof that no region is immune anymore. The inhabited landscape of Western Europe is becoming increasingly flammable. For the people living in these zones, the reality is terrifying. Evacuation orders are being issued with very little warning. In several cases this week, the fires moved faster than the official alerts. People had to rely on their own instincts, fleeing when they smelled smoke or saw the orange glow on the horizon. The individuals who left immediately were the ones who survived. Those who stayed behind to protect their property or who waited to see if the fire would change direction often found themselves trapped. They had to be rescued by emergency crews under life-threatening conditions. The message from civil protection authorities is clear and uncompromising. When the order to leave is given, you must go. There's no time to argue, no time to pack sentimental items, and no time to wait. The international response has been extraordinary, but it is a temporary bandage on a gaping wound. The deployment of military assets, the sharing of water bombers, and the cross-border movement of firefighters show a strong commitment to saving lives. But every official statement from Madrid, Paris, and Rome contains the same grim caveat. They all admit that they cannot fully control these fires until the weather changes. Human technology, no matter how advanced, is powerless against a landscape that has been primed to burn by months of extreme drought. The firefighters on the ground are not trying to put the fires out anymore. They are simply trying to steer the flames away from populated areas, sacrificing empty forests to save human lives. They are working through the night, breathing toxic air, battling exhaustion, and facing walls of heat that melt the paint on their trucks. Before we reach the final, most critical part of this story, I want to ask you to share this video right now. Send it to a friend or family member. The more people who understand the true scale of this crisis, the better prepared we all become for the future. So, where does this leave Europe? The short answer is that the continent is entering an era of unprecedented environmental volatility. The fire seasons of the past are gone. We are now dealing with fire years, where the threat never truly disappears. The drought conditions that fueled the fires this week will not magically vanish when autumn arrives. The soil moisture deficit is so deep that it will take months of consistent heavy rainfall to replenish it. And with winter precipitation becoming increasingly unpredictable, there is no guarantee that the rain will come. The infrastructure of these nations was built for a climate that no longer exists. Power grids are failing under the strain of extreme heat and falling trees. Roads are melting. Water reservoirs are turning into cracked mud. The governments of Spain, France, and Italy are being forced to rewrite their entire disaster management playbooks in real time. They are realizing that reactive measures, like sending in more fire trucks after a blaze has started, are no longer sufficient. The focus must shift to proactive measures. This means fundamentally changing how land is managed. It means clearing out dead brush, creating massive buffer zones around towns, and perhaps most controversially, reconsidering where people are allowed to build their homes. But policy changes take years, and the fires are burning today. The 300,000 people sleeping in evacuation centers tonight do not care about long-term climate models. They care about whether they will have a home to return to tomorrow. They care about the pets they had to leave behind. They care about the photo albums and family heirlooms that are currently turning to ash. The emotional toll of this disaster will linger long after the smoke clears. Entire communities have been fractured. The sense of safety and permanence that defines life in Western Europe has been shattered. Europe is on fire. This is not a metaphor. It is not an exaggeration used for dramatic effect. It is a literal physical reality. Military aircraft are dropping chemicals on forests that were popular tourist destinations just 2 weeks ago. Historic vineyards are choking on toxic smoke. Ancient rivers are drying up, and officials are standing in front of cameras admitting that they are powerless to stop the destruction. This is the new normal. A normal where the air is dangerous, the forests are fuel, and the wind is the enemy. If you are anywhere in southern or western Europe, you must remain hyper-vigilant. Follow the instructions of local authorities without hesitation. The window of time to escape a megafire is measured in minutes, not hours. For the rest of the world watching this unfold, do not look away. What is happening in Spain, France, and Italy today is a preview of what could happen anywhere tomorrow. The climate is changing, and the consequences are no longer theoretical. They are burning down the door. The recovery from this catastrophe will take decades. The forests will eventually grow back, but they will be different. The towns will be rebuilt, but the people who lived in them will be forever changed. The story of the great European wildfires will be written into the history books, a dark chapter marking the moment when the continent realized it was no longer immune to the wrath of a warming planet. Stay informed, stay prepared, and never underestimate the power of nature. The fires are still burning and the fight is far from over.